The void of space fractured silently as the human diplomatic vessel materialized, its hull gleaming with an unexpected luminescence that defied conventional starship design. The Zornak observation platforms hummed with nervous energy, their sophisticated sensor arrays struggling to categorize the approaching craft. Captain Alina Rodriguez stood at the bridge's central command, her posture relaxed yet charged with an undercurrent of potential energy. Her emerald eyes swept across the holographic displays, each movement calculated, each glance holding more meaning than most species could comprehend in a lifetime of communication. "Incoming transmission," announced Lieutenant Marcus Chen, his fingers dancing across the quantum communication interface. The bridge crew moved with a synchronicity that spoke of countless hours of training and an almost telepathic understanding. The first visual contact surprised the Zornak delegation. Captain Rodriguez wore a crisp uniform that seemed both military and diplomatic, a careful blend that spoke volumes about human adaptability. Her dark hair was pulled back in a precise bun, her features a complex mixture of heritage that reflected humanity's diverse genetic tapestry. A slight smirk played at the corner of her mouth. The Zornak primary diplomat, Krelvax, was a six-limbed being whose translucent exoskeleton shifted colors with emotional responses. Currently, it was cycling through shades of uncertainty, pale blue bleeding into a nervous green. Diplomatic Vessel Horizon. Krelvax's communication translator hummed. "You are cleared for approach to diplomatic platform Nexus 9. Captain Rodriguez's response was immediate, her voice carrying a tone that suggested multiple layers of meaning. "Acknowledged, Nexus 9. Preparing for standard approach protocols." But nothing about this approach was standard. The Horizon moved with a grace that defied its massive size. Sensor readings showed propulsion technologies that seemed to bend traditional physics, hinting at capabilities far beyond what the official human technological report suggested. Each micro-adjustment of the ship's trajectory seemed to whisper of potential, of something more. Lieutenant Chen leaned towards the captain, his voice low. "Alien sensor sweeps are showing increased complexity. They're trying to analyze our systems." Rodriguez's smirk deepened. "Let them look." The diplomatic platform grew larger in the view screen, a massive construct of interconnected modules representing dozens of galactic species. Nexus 9 was supposed to be neutral ground, a place of measured interactions and carefully negotiated conversations. Nobody had informed the other species that the humans were rewriting the rules of engagement. Krelvax's communication channel remained open, the diplomatic protocols running in the background. But something felt different. The human vessel's approach, the captain's demeanor, the subtle technological displays. Everything suggested a game was being played that the Zornak didn't yet understand. As the Horizon completed its docking sequence, the slight shift in atmospheric pressure seemed to carry a promise. Something was about to change. Fundamentally, irrevocably. Captain Alina Rodriguez adjusted her uniform, the movement smooth and deliberate. Her eyes met those of her bridge crew, a silent communication that spoke of preparation, of strategy, of a plan far more complex than a simple diplomatic mission. First contact was about to begin, and nobody, absolutely nobody, saw what was coming. The diplomatic reception hall of Nexus 9 buzzed with an electric tension that no translation matrix could fully capture. Captain Alina Rodriguez moved with calculated grace, each step a carefully choreographed dance of diplomatic potential. Krelvax introduced the initial delegation, a collection of species representing the most influential members of the Zornak Confederacy. There was Cathera, the silicon-based life form from the methane worlds of the Outer Rim. Beside her stood Zelman, a gaseous entity contained within an intricate environmental suit that shimmered with communication nodes. The final member was Drace, a crystalline being whose very existence challenged conventional understanding of sentient life. "We welcome the human delegation," Krelvax began, its exoskeleton shifting through a complex pattern of diplomatic colors, "to our shared diplomatic space." Captain Rodriguez's response was immediate, her words carrying a weight that seemed to hang in the air. "The honor is ours," she replied, her tone perfectly modulated, respectful yet subtly challenging. Lieutenant Chen stood slightly behind her, his hands clasped behind his back. To the alien observers, he appeared relaxed. To those who knew human body language, he was a coiled spring of potential energy. The initial exchange followed standard diplomatic protocols, a carefully choreographed dance of introductions, cultural acknowledgments, and preliminary communication checks. But something felt different. The human delegation seemed to be playing a game whose rules were known only to them. Zellman's communication nodes began to fluctuate unexpectedly. The gaseous entity's translator produced a series of statements that seemed almost, but not quite, nonsensical. Cthera's silicon-based sensors began picking up subtle harmonic frequencies that shouldn't have been possible in the current environmental configuration. "Interesting communication protocols," Captain Rodriguez remarked, her smirk barely concealed. "I'm sure we'll find much to discuss." The alien delegation exchanged glances, a universal gesture of confusion that transcended species. Each statement from the human captain seemed innocent, yet carried undertones of something more profound. It was as if she was speaking multiple conversations simultaneously, one verbally, another through body language, and yet another through some unspoken strategic framework. Drace's crystalline structure began to vibrate almost imperceptibly. The being's internal communication systems were working overtime, attempting to analyze every minute detail of the human interaction. "We are curious," Krulvax ventured, "about your specific diplomatic objectives." Captain Rodriguez's laugh was precisely calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to reveal nothing. "Objectives are such a limited concept," she responded. "We're here to explore potential." The statement meant everything and nothing. A linguistic trap that the alien diplomats found themselves unable to parse completely. Lieutenant Chen subtly adjusted a communication device on his wrist. To the alien observers, it appeared to be a simple movement. To those who understood human technology, it was a complex data exchange happening in microseconds. Something was happening. Something was being communicated. And the Zornak delegation was beginning to realize they were no longer controlling the conversation. They were reacting to it. The game had begun, and humanity had already written the first set of rules. The data transfer began innocuously, a seemingly random collection of scientific observations, geological surveys, and cultural footnotes that would have appeared mundane to any casual observer. But in the intricate world of interstellar diplomacy, nothing was ever truly random. Deep within the Zornak Confederacy's Central Intelligence Hub, analysts worked feverishly. Quantum processors hummed, dissecting every byte of information from the human diplomatic mission. Senior analyst Frentok studied the data streams, a growing sense of unease spreading through her neural network. "Something's wrong," she muttered to her assistant, a young technician named Galactic. "These data packets, they're too precise, too deliberate." The human data appeared chaotic at first glance. Star charts from seemingly unrelated sectors, geological surveys of abandoned mining colonies, fragments of communication logs from species long forgotten. Each piece looked disconnected, a jumble of meaningless information. But patterns were emerging. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in the diplomatic reception area, engaged in what appeared to be idle conversation with Krulvax. Her fingers occasionally brushed against a small communication device, each touch seemingly casual but precisely timed. Lieutenant Chen monitored the data exchange, his eyes tracking multiple holographic displays that showed only a fraction of the information being transmitted. To the alien observers, he looked like a communications specialist managing routine diplomatic protocols. In reality, he was conducting an intricate symphony of information warfare. The first hint of something deeper came when Trace, the crystalline diplomatic representative, began to show signs of internal disruption. Its carefully maintained molecular structure started to vibrate with unexpected frequencies. Cthera's silicon-based sensory array picked up anomalies in the background radiation patterns of the communication channels. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could be directly attributed to the human delegation. Just inconsistencies. Vrentok's analysis team worked through multiple dimensional processing layers. They began to see shadows of connections, whisper-thin threads linking seemingly unrelated pieces of information. A geological survey from a mining colony in the Outer Rim matched communication fragments from a diplomatic mission that had occurred 3 stellar cycles ago. A star chart contained microscopic encoding that referenced trade routes abandoned decades previous. "It's a puzzle," Galric said, "but what's the picture?" Vrentok's response was measured. "That's the wrong question. We should be asking who's designing the puzzle." Back in the diplomatic hall, Captain Rodriguez touched her communication device again. To anyone watching, it was a simple gesture. A check of a message, a routine interaction. But information flowed. Invisible. Precise. Deadly. The humans were fighting a war, and no one had fired a single weapon. Krelvax noticed something shifting in the diplomatic atmosphere. The human delegation moved with a synchronized grace that suggested something more than simple diplomatic training. Each interaction, each moment of conversation carried multiple layers of potential meaning. Lieutenant Chen caught the captain's eye. A single, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. The data continued to flow. Invisible. Relentless. Each packet a potential weapon in a war of information and perception. Something was coming, and the Zornak Confederacy was only beginning to understand the nature of the threat. The silence that followed Captain Rodriguez's next statement hung like a physical weight in the diplomatic chamber. Krelvax's exoskeleton cycled through colors so rapidly it became a blur of emotional chaos. "We have comprehensive data," she began, her voice calm and measured, regarding the internal tensions within the Zornak Confederacy's 3rd diplomatic quadrant. The room froze. Deep within the Confederacy's central intelligence complex, Vrentok's neural processors went into overdrive. How could humans possibly know about the confidential diplomatic negotiations that had been conducted in absolute secrecy? Negotiations so sensitive that even most senior Confederate officials remained unaware of their full complexity. Captain Rodriguez produced a data crystal. It was a simple object, transparent, roughly the size of her palm. But when she placed it on the central diplomatic interface, the holographic display erupted with a level of detail that defied explanation. Classified communication logs, intercepted diplomatic communications, detailed psychological profiles of key Confederate leadership, personal correspondence never meant to see the light of day. Each piece of information was presented with surgical precision, stripped of emotion but loaded with implications. Cathera's silicon-based sensory array began to destabilize. The mining disputes in the Epsilon sector. The trade route negotiations that had been conducted under maximum security protocols. The internal power struggle between the Methane World representatives and a crystalline diplomatic course. Every single detail exposed. Lieutenant Chen watched the alien delegates with calculated precision. His eyes tracked their micro-expressions, recording every subtle shift of body language, every moment of internal conflict. Drace, the crystalline diplomatic representative, began to fracture. Literally, microscopic fissures appeared in its carefully maintained molecular structure, a physical manifestation of the psychological shock. "This is impossible." Zellman's communication node sputtered, the gaseous entity's environmental suit fluctuating with waves of electromagnetic confusion. Captain Rodriguez's smirk returned, not triumphant, not aggressive, simply knowing. "Impossible is a limitation of perspective," she responded, her voice carrying the weight of something far beyond a simple diplomatic statement. Vrentok, monitoring the transmission remotely, realized the true nature of the attack. This wasn't about the information itself. This was a demonstration of capability, a psychological warfare technique so sophisticated that it transcended traditional understanding of intelligence gathering. The humans hadn't just collected information. They had dismantled the very concept of Confederate security. Krelvax attempted to regain diplomatic composure. "And what is the purpose of this?" Demonstration. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. Purpose is such a linear concept, she said. We're simply establishing a baseline of understanding. The statement meant everything and nothing. A linguistic trap that left the alien diplomat struggling to formulate a response. Lieutenant Chen subtly adjusted a communication device. To the alien observers, it appeared to be a simple movement. To those who understood human technology, it was a complex data exchange happening in microseconds. The psychological trap had been sprung, and the Zornak Confederacy was just beginning to understand the depth of their miscalculation. Humanity had arrived, and they were playing an entirely different game. The first fracture appeared in the Zornak Confederacy's diplomatic network, like a hairline crack in a perfect crystal. Imperceptible at first, but destined to spread. Communication channels began to change. Subtle at first. A diplomatic representative here suddenly questioning long-standing agreements. A trade route adjustment there that seemed innocent, but the pattern was anything but random. In the central communication hub of the Confederate Diplomatic Corps, senior analysts watched in growing horror as decades of carefully constructed alliances began to unravel. Each piece of information the humans had shared was a precisely placed explosive charge designed to create maximum structural damage with minimal direct intervention. The Methane World representatives turned against their long-standing allies from the crystalline diplomatic corps. Trade agreements that had stood for generations suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny. Internal communication logs revealed uncomfortable truths that had been carefully hidden for stellar cycles. Vrentok tracked the cascading effects, her neural processors working at maximum capacity. The humans hadn't just shared information. They had strategically exposed the fundamental weaknesses in the Confederate structure. It's a systemic collapse, she muttered to her assistant Galactic. But they're not even in the room anymore. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat aboard the Horizon, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. Lieutenant Chen monitored multiple communication channels, each movement precise and calculated. Projection models, she asked quietly. Chen's response was immediate. Estimated complete diplomatic fragmentation in approximately 72 standard hours. The beauty of their strategy was its absolute simplicity. No direct conflict. No aggressive action. Just information. Precisely placed. Perfectly timed. On the diplomatic platform, Krelvax found himself increasingly isolated. The six-limbed diplomat's exoskeleton cycled through colors of panic and confusion. Allies who had stood together for generations were now turning against each other with surprising speed. Thera, the silicon-based representative, began formal proceedings to challenge trade agreements that had been sacrosanct for centuries. The crystalline diplomat Drace found its molecular structure becoming increasingly unstable as internal pressures mounted. Zellman's communication node started broadcasting independent analysis that directly contradicted long-standing Confederate policies. Each transmission was backed by meticulously prepared documentation. Documentation that had mysteriously become available at precisely the right moment. The humans weren't just observing the destruction. They were architects of a diplomatic apocalypse. They're using our own systems against us, Galrix observed in the intelligence hub, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. Vrentok's response was measured. They're not just using our systems, they're revealing the fundamental lies we've built our civilization upon. Aboard the Horizon, Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. Not a triumphant grin. Not a moment of victory. Just a simple acknowledgement of a strategy executing perfectly. Lieutenant Chen caught her eye. Another imperceptible nod passed between them. The Zornak Confederacy was coming apart at the seams, and they were doing it to themselves. Humanity hadn't fired a single weapon. They hadn't launched a single attack. They had simply shown a mirror to a civilization that was not prepared to see its true reflection. The cascade continued. Unstoppable. Inevitable. The final diplomatic chamber felt more like a battlefield than a negotiation space. Krelvax stood at the center, 6 limbs trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. exoskeleton cycling through colors that spoke of complete psychological breakdown. Explain, the diplomat demanded, the translation matrix struggling to capture the full depth of emotion. Captain Alina Rodriguez remained seated, her posture relaxed yet coiled with potential energy. Lieutenant Chen stood slightly behind her, a silent sentinel monitoring every microscopic interaction. The Zornak leadership had assembled their most formidable diplomatic minds. Kythera's silicon-based form vibrated with tension. Drace, the crystalline representative, had been partially reconstructed after its earlier molecular disruption. Zellman's communication nodes sparked with erratic energy. "Explain what?" Rodriguez responded, her voice a study in calculated calm. Vrentok, monitoring remotely from the Confederate intelligence hub, watched the interaction with a mixture of professional fascination and growing dread. Every potential response by the Zornak delegation had been anticipated. Every potential strategy had been mapped. The humans weren't just prepared. They were several moves ahead in a game nobody else realized was being played. The information, Krulvax pressed, the systematic destruction of our diplomatic networks. The exposure of our most sensitive communications. Rodriguez's smile was precise, calculated, a weapon more dangerous than any physical arsenal. Information, she said slowly, is simply a perspective waiting to be understood. The statement hung in the air, laden with implications that stretched far beyond its simple words. Lieutenant Chen subtly adjusted a communication device. To the alien observers, it appeared to be a routine check. To those who understood human technology, it was a complex data exchange happening in microscopic intervals. Drace attempted to interject, its crystalline structure attempting to form coherent communication patterns. "You have violated fundamental diplomatic protocols." "Protocols," Rodriguez responded, "are simply guidelines written by those who fear change." Each word was a precisely placed surgical instrument, dissecting the very foundations of Confederate diplomatic understanding. The intelligence hub tracked the interaction in real time. Vrentok's neural processors worked at maximum capacity, analyzing every microscopic interaction, every subtle body movement, every potential strategic implication. Kythera's sensory arrays began to detect anomalies. The humans weren't just defending. They were revealing, demonstrating, teaching. "We've mapped your entire communication infrastructure," Rodriguez continued, her voice never rising, never changing. "Every diplomatic channel, every secret negotiation, every hidden conflict." The confrontation was unlike any diplomatic encounter in Confederate history. This wasn't about winning an argument. This was about revealing fundamental truths. Zellman's communication nodes began to broadcast independently verified data, information so precise, so devastating that it made previous Confederate intelligence look like children's drawings. "How?" Krulvax demanded, the word a mixture of desperation and professional curiosity. Rodriguez's response was simple. "We listened." But listening, in human terms, was something far more complex than a simple auditory process. It was a complete, comprehensive understanding that went beyond traditional communication methods. The diplomatic chamber had become a classroom. The humans were the unexpected instructors, and the Zornak Confederacy was about to receive a lesson they would never forget. Interstellar communication networks erupted with unprecedented intensity. The news of the human diplomatic encounter spread faster than light, carried on waves of quantum communication and encrypted data streams. Every species was reassessing humanity. The central communication hub of the Galactic Cooperative Reception watched in stunned silence. Diplomatic representatives from thousands of civilizations reviewed the transmitted data, each analysis revealing layers of complexity that defied traditional understanding. Captain Alina Rodriguez had become more than a diplomatic officer. She was a symbol of something far more profound. Vrentok's analysis, leaked through multiple communication channels, became a focal point of galactic discussion. The detailed breakdown of human strategic capabilities sent shockwaves through established power structures. They didn't just gather information, one crystalline diplomatic advisor noted. They demonstrated a fundamental understanding of systemic communication that exceeds our most advanced predictive models. Lieutenant Chen monitored the galactic response, each data stream carefully tracked, each communication channel analyzed with microscopic precision. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a diplomatic mission into a comprehensive demonstration of strategic capability without firing a single aggressive transmission. Smaller galactic civilizations began to recalculate their diplomatic approaches. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries suddenly found themselves under intense reassessment. Communication protocols developed over millennia were being questioned. Theris communication networks began broadcasting independent analyses that supported the human demonstration. The silicon-based civilization recognized something profound had occurred, a fundamental shift in galactic understanding. Humanity is no longer an unknown quantity, a senior diplomatic advisor from the Methane World representatives announced. They are a strategic force that cannot be ignored. The horizon remained in position, a silent testament to the encounter. Its technological configuration defied conventional understanding. Systems that seemed to blend communication, defensive capabilities, and information processing in ways no other civilization had conceived. Trace, the crystalline diplomatic representative, began transmitting comprehensive analyses of the encounter. Each transmission revealed more about human capabilities. Each data packet a window into a civilization that refused to be defined by traditional limitations. Zellman's communication nodes became a primary source of information, broadcasting detailed breakdowns of the human strategic approach. The gaseous entity had recognized something profound. Humanity represented a new paradigm of strategic thinking. Galactic power structures began to realign. Diplomatic missions were recalled. Communication protocols were being rewritten. Captain Rodriguez watched the unfolding galactic response with a calm that bordered on mathematical precision. This wasn't about conquest. This was about establishing a new understanding. Lieutenant Chen caught her eye. Another imperceptible nod passed between them. A communication more complex than entire diplomatic treaties. The tremors were just beginning. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same again. The true scope of the mission became clear in the quiet moments after the diplomatic storm. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in her private quarters aboard the Horizon, reviewing centuries of preparation compressed into a single strategic moment. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission. This was the culmination of a plan generations in the making. Lieutenant Chen compiled the final analysis reports. Each data point told a story far more complex than any single encounter could suggest. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since their first tentative steps into interstellar communication. Every scientific mission, every exploratory vessel, every seemingly random data collection had been part of a comprehensive strategy. The Zornak Confederacy was just the first demonstration, a proof of concept for a much larger strategic approach. Vrentok's leaked analysis documents revealed only a fraction of the true depth. Human communication strategies weren't just about gathering information. They were about understanding fundamental systemic interactions at a level no other civilization had conceived. "It's about potential," Rodriguez murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The galactic communication networks continued to buzz with analysis. Diplomatic missions were being recalled. Strategic assessments were being rewritten. Humanity had demonstrated something profound: the ability to transform information into a strategic asset more powerful than any weapon. Theris communication networks began broadcasting independent confirmations of human capabilities. The silicon-based civilization recognized that something fundamental had changed in galactic dynamics. Lieutenant Chen's final report was a masterpiece of strategic analysis. Each paragraph revealed layers of preparation that stretched back generations, scientific missions that appeared random, communication attempts that seemed inefficient. All of it was part of a comprehensive strategy. Drace, the crystalline diplomatic representative, continued to broadcast comprehensive analyses. Each transmission revealed more about human capabilities. each data packet a window into a civilization that refused to be defined by traditional limitations. The horizon remained in position, a silent testament to a new approach to interstellar interaction. This wasn't about conquest. This was about establishing a new paradigm of communication and understanding. Rodriguez reviewed the original mission parameters. What appeared to be a simple diplomatic encounter was actually a comprehensive demonstration of human potential. Every action, every communication, every strategic decision had been carefully planned. The smirk that had first caught the Zornak's attention now made perfect sense. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a recognition of a strategy generations in the making. Lieutenant Chen approached with the final analysis. Another imperceptible nod passed between them. A communication more complex than entire diplomatic treaties. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and the game was just beginning. The long game had been playing out for generations, and now finally, the first move had been made.